Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If you've been with this channel for a while, you know what we do here. We sit with men who came to this country chasing something. Love, or a second chance, or just a reason to get out of bed. And we let them tell you what happened. Most of the time, it's a warning. Most of the time, somebody loses something they can't get back. This one's different. Harley is 61 years old. He's from Clearwater, Florida. He spent 34 years as a professional cook. Not a chef on television, not the kind with the cookbook deal. The kind who shows up before sunrise and keeps a kitchen running for 400 people without anyone ever knowing his name. He came to the Philippines about 2 years ago with no romantic agenda, no retirement fantasy, no idea he was going to put nearly $20,000 into a business with a woman he'd known for 3 months. What happened from there, what he built, what almost went wrong, and what a stranger at a bar in Cebu City had to do with any of it. That's the story he's here to tell you. Here he is, in his own words. I'm going to be straight with you from the jump. I'm not a storyteller. I'm a cook. I think in terms of prep lists and ticket times, not narrative arcs. So if this comes out a little sideways, just bear with me. 34 years. That's how long I was in kitchens. Started washing dishes at a Howard Johnson's outside Tampa when I was 17, worked my way up through the line, got my union card, spent the back half of my career managing banquet operations at hotels on the Gulf Coast. Not glamorous. I'm not going to pretend it was. You want glamorous? Go watch the Food Network. I was doing breakfast service for 300 conventioneers at 6 in the morning, running a casino buffet where the point wasn't flavor, it was throughput and sanitation scores. But I was good at it. That part one'll stand behind. I knew how to run a kitchen, knew how to manage people, manage food costs, keep service moving when everything was falling apart at once. I was built for that environment in a way I've never been built for anything else. My 60th birthday came around, and the hotel group I'd worked for the last 11 years told me my pension was fully vested. The union had been paying in for decades. Between the pension and Social Security, I was looking at just under $4,000 a month coming in no matter what I did. Plus, I had about $95,000 in savings. For a guy who'd spent his whole life on his feet in a hot kitchen, that was a decent position to be in. So, they threw me a retirement party. Sheet cake from the Publix down the road, which, I'd been feeding people professionally for 34 years, so that was a choice someone made. The general manager shook my hand. Gerald, his name was. Gerald, who I'd worked under for 6 years, and who I'm pretty sure called me Harvey at least twice during the little speech he gave. Got a card signed by the kitchen staff. Drove home. Sat down on the couch in my condo in Clearwater. That was it. That was the end of something, and the start of something else, and I had absolutely no idea what the something else was going to be. I want to be precise about what the problem was, because I think people assume it was loneliness, and it wasn't, not exactly. I'd been divorced, but that was 11 years back, and I'd made my peace with it. No kids. A few friends, mostly guys from the industry, guys who were still working. The problem wasn't that I was alone. The problem was that I was useless. My whole life, everything I was, existed in relation to a kitchen that needed running. Take that away, and I was just a 60-year-old man in a condo in Clearwater with nowhere to be by 5:30 in the morning. I tried things. I did. Bought a fishing rod and went out on a charter a few times. Fine. Relaxing, I guess, if you like relaxing, which I discovered I don't. Tried golf, played 9 holes twice, quit because it felt like I was practicing being old. A buddy talked me into a Caribbean cruise in month 2. 7 nights, all inclusive, nice enough boat. I sat at the pool bar on the second afternoon and realized the only thing I was interested in was watching the kitchen entrance to see how they were handling the lunch rush. I'm not joking. That's what I did on my vacation. Timed the ticket flow through the galley door. The condo started to get to me. I don't know how else to put it. It was a perfectly decent place. Nice enough building, pool, 2 blocks from the water. But there was something about the silence of it at 7 in the morning that was, I can only describe it as wrong. Like sitting in a waiting room with no appointment. You're there. Everything's fine. Nothing is happening. Nothing is going to happen. You're just there. I started watching YouTube in the afternoons, which was new for me. I'd never been much of a phone person while I was working. You don't have time. But now I had time. Too much of it. I started where most people start, cooking channels, tutorials, technique videos. Then the algorithm did what the algorithm does and started feeding me food travel content. A guy eating his way through Tokyo. A woman doing a street food tour in Hanoi. And then, one Tuesday in January, a 30-minute video of some Australian walking through a wet market in Cebu City in the Philippines. I watched it twice. Not because of the Australian. Because of the market. Because of what was happening in that market at 6 in the morning. 40, 50 vendors. Each one with their own setup, their own product, their own system. Fish laid out by type and size, with a logic to the arrangement that I recognized immediately, because it's the same logic you use when you set a cold station. Meat hung and cut to order. Women frying things on single burners, with a speed and efficiency that would not have been out of place in any professional kitchen I'd worked in. And the whole thing running, this enormous complex organism of food production and commerce, without a manager, without a ticket system, without any of the infrastructure I'd spent 30 years depending on. Just everyone knowing their part and doing it. I watched maybe 40 more videos over the next 2 weeks. Not expat content, not bar scenes, not retirement lifestyle stuff. Food, markets, street vendors, home cooks, small family restaurants. Carinderia tours. I watched a 20-minute video of a woman making carré from scratch and spent most of it analyzing her mise en place. In February, I booked a flight to Cebu. 2 weeks, told myself, just going to look. I want to be clear about my mental state at that point. I wasn't running towards something. I was running away from a couch in Clearwater and a condo that smelled like nothing. That's the honest version. I had the money, I had the time, I had a pension that was going to deposit whether I was in Florida or the moon, and I had nothing to lose by going to look at something that interested me. My flight connected through Tokyo Narita, 14 hours in the air, then a 2-hour layover, then another 2.5 to Mactan Cebu International. I was 60 years old, and I'd never been to Asia. I didn't know what I was doing. The cab from the airport into the city took about 40 minutes, and somewhere in the middle of that drive, stuck in traffic on a road lined with tarpaulin signs and sorry stores and a Jollibee every quarter mile, I rolled down the window because the air conditioning in the cab was losing the fight against the humidity, and I smelled something. Something cooking. Something with shrimp paste and long-cooked meat and charcoal underneath it all. I asked the driver what it was. He pointed at a small, open-front eatery set back from the road. Maybe 8 plastic tables inside. A woman standing over a pot the size of a laundry basin. I didn't stop that night. I was tired and disoriented, and I needed to find my pension house and sleep. But I thought about that smell for 3 days afterward. That should tell you something about the state I was in. Not looking for love, not looking for an adventure, looking for a reason to care about what was in the pot. The first thing I want to say about Cebu is that nobody tells you about the humidity correctly. People say it's humid. Sure, Florida's humid. I know humid. Tampa in August, you walk outside, and the air pushes back at you like a wet towel. Cebu is different. Cebu is humid, the way a commercial dishwasher is humid when you open the door. That specific dense heat that has weight to it, that gets into your clothes and your lungs immediately, and just stays there. I stepped out of the cab on my first afternoon, dragged my bag through the gate of this pension house near IT Park, and by the time I got to my room, I'd already reconsidered every decision I'd made in the previous 3 weeks. The room was fine, small, clean, ceiling fan doing its best, a window that looked out onto a narrow street where a tricycle driver was asleep in his cab with a hand over his face. I sat on the bed, jet-lagged and sticky, and thought, 60 years old, alone in a pension house in a country I'd never been to, on the other side of the planet from my condo in Clearwater. For what? I slept for 11 hours. Day 2 was better. I walked. That's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I walk and I look, same way I'd walk a kitchen before first service, just taking inventory. The street outside the pension was maybe 300 meters of compressed activity. A sorry store at one end with an old man behind the window screen. A basketball half-court, wedged between 2 buildings with 4 teenagers playing at 7 in the morning. A woman selling fish balls from a cart, her fryer already going, the smell of the oil mixing with the exhaust from a jeepney grinding past. I stood and watched her for about 10 minutes. She had the burner dialed to the right temperature. You could tell by how the balls moved in the oil, not frantic, just steady. And she was handling money, and keeping the fryer moving, and answering questions from customers all simultaneously, and her eyes never left the basket. That part 1 recognized. You see that in good line cooks. The hands do the work, while the brain does something else. I want to be clear about something. I was not thinking about investment or partnership or any of what came later. I was just watching someone work well and feeling, for the first time in 3 months, interested in what I was looking at. By day 3, I'd mapped out every food option within a 5-minute walk. There were 6, not counting the fish ball cart. I ate at each of them. By day 4, I'd made my assessments. 2 were fine, adequate, consistent. 1 was actively bad. Rice that had sat too long, protein I couldn't identify confidently. 1 was trying too hard in an environment that didn't support it. And 1, 2 doors down from the pension entrance, was operating at a different level than the others. But that comes later. What I want to talk about first is the wet market at Carbon, because that's where my brain came back online. I found it on day 3, walked there at 5:30 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and had nothing else to do. Carbon is the main public market in Cebu City. Big, chaotic-looking, absolutely enormous by the time you're inside it. Multiple floors. Vendors packed in together with about 18 inches between them in some sections. Everything from vegetables to live chickens to dried fish to plastic kitchen equipment. The smell hits you from outside. Fish and earth and something slightly fermented, and underneath it all, the green smell of things recently cut. I walked in and stopped moving for probably a full minute, just standing there like an idiot while people went around me. Because here's the thing, it looked like chaos. From outside, from a distance, it looked like noise and disorder, and no organization whatsoever. But I've spent 34 years in kitchens, and a kitchen, from the outside, also looks like chaos. People moving fast, things happening everywhere, nothing seeming to connect. What you learn, what takes years to learn, is that underneath the apparent chaos, there's a structure. There's always a structure. Everything has a station. Everything has a sequence. The chaos is just what it looks like when a very tight system is running at full speed. Carbon Market ran on that logic. Fish vendors clustered by type. Fresh whole fish nearest the entrance, then cut fish, then dried. Each section internally organized by species and size, with a logic to the arrangement that I could follow immediately. The vegetable section organized by what spoils fastest nearest the outer edges. Hardier produce deeper in. Meat vendors with prep areas set back from the selling counter, keeping the mess away from the transaction. I don't think anyone sat down and planned it that way. I think it evolved over decades of people figuring out the most efficient version of the same problem, which is exactly how a good kitchen works. I walked that market for 2 hours, talked to some vendors, most spoke enough English to manage, and they were uniformly amused by the old American in the polo shirt, who kept asking questions about their inventory rotation. One woman selling kangkong and eggplant offered me a small banana and watched me eat it with a serious expression, like it was a test. I have no idea what the right answer was. I ate the banana. She seemed satisfied. I called the pension house from outside the market and asked if I could extend for another week. The woman on the phone said yes, without any particular surprise. Like foreign men deciding to stay longer was not unusual. I extended again at the end of that week, and the week after. At some point I stopped counting in terms of extensions and started thinking of it as just where I was. There's a moment I keep coming back to, a specific moment. It was maybe day 6 or 7, 5:30 in the morning again, and I was back at Carbon, standing at a corner near the entrance where 4 different things were happening simultaneously. A woman frying something in a shallow pan, another vendor arranging produce, a delivery of ice blocks arriving, a kid, maybe 12 years old, weaving through all of it on a bicycle with a stack of empty crates. And I felt my brain do something it hadn't done since the retirement party. It started running scenarios, throughput calculations, wondering about the supply chain for that ice delivery, thinking about the fuel cost on that fryer versus an electric model. Just working. The way it worked for 34 years in hotel kitchens. It was the most awake I'd felt since January. I bought a cup of coffee from a vendor near the exit. 3-in-1 sachet stuff, sweet and thin, nothing like what I'd drink at home. And stood there in the early morning and drank it and thought, okay, there might be something here. I didn't know yet what the something was. I wasn't thinking about money or business or what came next. I was just thinking that this was a place where food meant something, and that mattered to me in a way I didn't fully have words for yet. But I was starting to pay attention to the carinderia 2 doors from the pension, and starting to understand that the woman running it was doing something right, and that I wanted to know how. Let me start with the kare, because it's where everything begins. I'd been eating my way through the street on a system. 1 place per meal, notes in my head, same way you'd evaluate a vendor for a hotel contract. Quality, consistency, portion logic, how fast they moved tickets. By day 3, I had my assessments locked in. Most were fine. 1 was bad enough that I skipped it after the first visit, and 1, 2 doors down from the pension entrance with no sign out front, and maybe 15 plastic stools inside, was doing something different. I walked in around noon on day 4. Small room, ceiling fan, a handwritten menu on a whiteboard near the back. 4 or 5 dishes listed. Ate the sinigang first. Pork ribs, tamarind broth, the kind of sour that sits at the back of your jaw. Correct? Then the kare. Here's the thing about kare. It's not a hard dish to make adequately. It's a very hard dish to make well. The peanut base has to be rich without being heavy. which is a balance that takes time and attention. The oxtail has to be braised long enough that the collagen releases into the sauce, but the meat still has structure, not falling apart, just yielding. And the bagoong, the fermented shrimp paste on the side, has to have enough funk to cut through all that richness without overwhelming it. A lot of places just buy a commercial bagoong and call it done. You can tell immediately. This was not that. I sat there and ate the whole thing slowly and professionally, the way you taste something when you're trying to understand it. And by the end, I had a list of things I wanted to know. What ratio of ground peanut to peanut butter in the base? How long the oxtail had braised, and at what temperature? Whether the bagoong was house-made or sourced, and from where. These were not the thoughts of a customer. They were the thoughts of someone who had spent 34 years in commercial kitchens and could not turn that part of his brain off. I came back the next day. And the day after. I didn't say anything beyond ordering and paying. The woman running it, Marilu, though I didn't know her name yet, moved efficiently in a kitchen that was too small for what she was producing, working around limitations the way you do when you've cooked in the same space for years and know every constraint by reflex. The conversation started because she ran out of sinigang. It was a Thursday, 11:30 in the morning. I came in, 2 other customers were finishing up, and she told me the sinigang was gone. I looked at the clock. I looked at her, and I said directly, probably more directly than was polite, that she was running out of her second most ordered dish 90 minutes before lunch service ends, and had she considered just making more of it? She looked at me the way people look at you when they're deciding whether you're worth their time. I am making what the pot holds, she said. The pot is this big. I said there were larger pots. She said larger pots cost money. I said I understood that, and what was the name of her supplier? That was the beginning. Not charming, not warm. 2 people talking about a pot. Her name was Marilu. Her husband had passed 2 years before. A stroke. Sudden. He was 53. 3 kids. 2 daughters still in school. A son finishing his last year and looking at university. The building was her husband's family's, passed to her. She owned it outright, which meant no rent, which was the only reason the carinderia was viable on the margins it ran. The equipment was original to the space, most of it 15 years old, and the range had 2 burners that worked reliably, and a third she'd stopped trusting. She told me this without any particular emotional weight. Facts. This is the situation. She wasn't asking for anything, wasn't pitching anything. She was just answering my questions the way I'd answered hers. I want to be precise about this, because it matters to what comes later. There was nothing romantic happening. I was not interested in Marilu romantically, and she was, as far as I could tell, not interested in me in any way, except as a possible source of useful information. She was a widow in her mid-40s running a small food business on the margins, focused entirely on keeping it going. What she wanted to know was whether the retired American who kept analyzing her food actually knew anything. A few days later, she asked me directly. I'd stayed after the lunch rush to help with cleanup. She hadn't asked me to. I just started doing it, because the dish situation was inefficient, and I can't watch inefficiency for long. And she stopped what she was doing and said, "You are retired chef? Then why are you just eating and not saying anything useful?" I thought about that for a second. Then I told her what I'd observed about her throughput limits, her equipment constraints, the underutilized storage room visible through the back doorway that could add 4 square meters of prep space if reconfigured, and the fact that her cara base could be made in larger batches and portioned without quality loss, which would reduce her morning prep time and let her produce more covers without adding labor. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she said, The storage room has a rat problem. I said that was fixable. She looked at me again with that same evaluating expression. Then she said, "Come back tomorrow at 2, after service." And that was it. That was how it started. No pitch, no proposition, no money mentioned. Two people who spoke the same professional language, figuring out whether it was worth talking further. I'm telling you this because the whole thing that followed, the investment, the legal setup, the complications that came later, none of it would have happened if the first conversation had been about anything other than the size of a pot and whether a storage room was worth reclaiming. It was professional before it was anything else. That mattered. It still matters when I think about why it worked when it could easily have not. I went back at 2. We talked for 3 hours. She made us coffee. The 3-in-1 sachet, kind, sweet and thin, and we sat at one of the plastic tables after the other customers had gone, and I drew a rough layout of the kitchen on a paper napkin and started asking her what she'd change if she could change anything. By the time I left, I had a list. By the next morning, I was pricing equipment. That was the moment I should have slowed down. Not because anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong yet. But because I was moving at kitchen speed, which is the only speed I know. And I was about to put money into a foreign country based on 3 weeks of observation and a few hours of conversation. And I hadn't asked a single legal question yet. I didn't know enough to know what I didn't know. The plan came together over about 2 weeks of afternoon conversations at one of the plastic tables after service closed. Marilou's process was methodical. She'd finish the last cover, get her daughter started on dishes, wipe down the prep surfaces in a specific sequence I recognized as someone who'd developed their own muscle memory routine over decades, and then sit down with a glass of water and whatever was left in the rice cooker. I'd have coffee, the 3-in-1 sachet stuff, always. She didn't own a proper coffee maker. And we'd talk through what the place could be. I want to describe what this felt like from the inside because I think it's important. This was the most engaged I'd been in a conversation since before my retirement party. We were talking about throughput and equipment specs and batch sizes. We were talking about whether the storage room's rat situation was structural or opportunistic. We were talking about which dishes held quality at scale and which ones needed to be made fresh to order. This was work. And I hadn't done work in 4 months, and I had not understood until those afternoons just how badly I'd needed it. By week 4, I had a rough investment figure in my head. To do this properly, new 6-burner range, proper refrigeration with reliable temperature control, a new prep table, the storage room cleared and tiled and brought into the workflow, I was looking at $180,000. That's roughly $200. Against my savings, that was nothing. I had $95,000 sitting in a money market account in Clearwater, earning about enough interest to cover my Netflix subscription. $3,000 was not a meaningful number. I told myself that was a good sign, that because the number was small, the risk was small. I think about that logic now and it bothers me, because the size of the number has nothing to do with whether the arrangement is sound. I was going to hand her the money on a handshake. I want to be honest about that. I had already mentally drafted how I'd propose it. Here's what I'd like to contribute. Here's what I think we can do with it. Let's see how it goes. Casual, no paperwork, no structure, just 2 professionals who'd developed mutual respect and a clear-eyed assessment of what needed doing. That was the plan on a Thursday evening. On Friday, I ended up at a bar near the Ayala Mall. I wasn't looking for company. I'd walked over to SM Seaside earlier in the afternoon to price a piece of refrigeration equipment at one of the appliance stores on the ground floor. And on the walk back, I passed a small open-front bar with a ceiling fan and a San Miguel sign. And I went in because it was hot, and I was tired. There was one other foreigner in there. Australian, late 50s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of tan you get from years rather than vacation. Nursing a beer and watching a basketball game on a TV mounted too high on the wall. His name was Cole. We got talking the way you do when you're the only two foreigners in a small bar in a foreign city. Not because you necessarily have anything in common, but because the alternative is silence, and you're both a little lonely, even if you wouldn't say so. I told him what I was working on, not looking for his opinion, just talking. He listened without much expression, and when I finished, he asked one question. Is any of this in writing? I said, not yet. But we had a solid understanding, and Marilu was straightforward. I'd been working with her for a month, and I had a good read on her. He nodded slowly, took a drink. Then he told me about his restaurant. 5 years earlier, Cole had put $850,000, around $15,000, into a small restaurant in a Cebu suburb, with a Filipino business partner he'd known for 2 years. Solid guy, Cole said. Genuinely solid. Not a scammer, not running a game. A decent person who happened to have a family. And when the restaurant started doing well, the family noticed. A cousin showed up and was installed as manager through a process that Cole didn't fully understand until it was done. The cousin had access to the accounts. The accounts stopped reflecting what Cole was observing in the dining room. When Cole raised this with his partner, the conversation was uncomfortable and indirect, and nothing changed. When he pushed harder, the relationship ruptured. He had no legal structure, no documented ownership stake, no recourse. He walked away from $850,000 and a friendship. He wasn't bitter about it in a dramatic way. He was just flat. That's what struck me. Not angry, not self-pitying. Just matter of fact, the way you are about something that happened and can't unhappen. Everyone who lost money here thought the handshake was enough, he said, because everyone seemed so friendly. He finished his beer and left about 20 minutes later. I sat there for another hour. I went back to Marilu the next day and told her I wanted to do this properly, that I wanted a lawyer involved, a documented structure, a formal record of what we were each contributing and what we each were entitled to. I was direct about it, which is the only way I know how to be. I said it wasn't about trust. It was about having something solid underneath us so that if things got complicated, between us, or because of family, or because of anything I couldn't anticipate, we had a foundation to point to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd been thinking the same thing and hadn't known how to raise it. That landed on me in a way I didn't expect. Cole gave me the name of his lawyer, a woman who worked out of an office on Osmeña Boulevard and who charged reasonable rates and had no obvious reason to favor either side. We met with her twice in the first week. She explained the structure clearly. As a foreigner, I couldn't own a majority stake in a Philippine business. The legal route was a domestic corporation, with Marilu holding 60% and me at 40%, with my capital contribution documented as an investor loan with defined repayment terms, so my money wasn't just absorbed into her equity with no path back. The process took 6 weeks. Almost exactly 6 weeks, which felt like 6 months to me. There were documents to gather, filings to make, a SEC registration, a tax identification number for the entity. There were days I sat in that pension house in the afternoon heat listening to the neighbors' karaoke bleed through the wall and wondered if I was overcomplicating a simple thing, if Cole's situation wasn't relevant to mine, if the paperwork was just killing momentum that would be hard to rebuild. But I kept going back to that one question. Is any of this in writing? The legal setup cost $45,000 in total fees, about $800, money I would not think twice about spending on a piece of kitchen equipment. It remains the best $800 I've spent in this country. And I say that having spent money on things that did not work out as planned. The structure didn't guarantee success. It just meant that whatever happened, we had something real underneath us. Marilou was patient through the whole process. More patient than I was. She answered the lawyer's questions thoroughly, provided documents I didn't know she had, handled the filings at the SEC office on 2 separate trips without complaint. I think about that sometimes. She could have walked away from the whole thing, an impatient American with a list of questions, and a lawyer and a process that was holding up money she could actually use. She didn't walk away. That mattered, not as a guarantee, but as information. The paperwork was signed on a Tuesday morning in the lawyer's office. We shook hands afterward in the corridor, professionally. And then we went back to the carinderia because it was almost 11, and she had a lunch service to run. The first thing I did after the paperwork was signed was buy a prep table. Not order one, buy one. I found a commercial kitchen supplier off Mandaue City, loaded the table into a rented tricycle sidecar, which the driver found extremely funny, and carried it into the carinderia myself. Marilou's regular noon customers watched a 60-year-old American install a stainless steel prep station in a kitchen he technically owned 40% of, and nobody said anything, but a few of them nodded in a way that I took as approval. I want to be honest about the satisfaction of that. After 6 weeks of documents and meetings and waiting rooms and SEC filings and a process that moved at a pace roughly equivalent to continental drift, putting my hands on a piece of equipment and bolting it to a floor felt like drinking water after a long shift. This was the part one knew. Everything before it had been paperwork. This was kitchen. The P180,000 equipment upgrade went in over 2 weeks. New 6-burner range, refrigeration unit with a thermostat that actually held temperature. The prep table. A proper ventilation hood to replace the inadequate one that had been making the back kitchen uninhabitable on hot afternoons, which in Cebu means most afternoons. I sourced everything I could locally, drove to 3 different suppliers to compare pricing, and came in just under budget at P174,000, about $3,100. The storage room took another week. We cleared it, treated it for the rat situation, which was opportunistic rather than structural as I'd suspected, tiled the floor ourselves over 2 days with a guy Marilou knew who did this kind of work cheaply and well. Added a second prep area and a dry storage rack system I designed on a napkin and had welded at a metal shop around the corner for P8,000. Then I cut an opening in the front wall between the kitchen and the dining area. This was my idea. In the casino, the carving station always drew the longest line. Not because the food was better than everything else. It usually wasn't, but because people could see it happening. There's something about watching food being prepared that makes you trust it, makes you hungry for it in a different way than just looking at a menu description. I wanted that. A window, maybe a meter wide, so the prep work was visible from the tables. Marilou thought it was unusual. Her customers thought it was unusual. Within 2 weeks, the 2 stools nearest the window were the first to fill every day. 6 weeks after the equipment went in, we were doing 2 full lunch turnovers, and we'd added a breakfast service, arroz caldo and pandesal. Simple, manageable, a different customer than the lunch crowd, but consistent. Revenue was up. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. Enough that Marilou started talking about her son's university fees with less of the compressed quality she'd had in her voice whenever that topic came up before. That's when the second location entered the conversation. There was a university campus about 20 minutes away by jeepney, and the strip of food stalls and small eateries near the main gate was doing tremendous volume at lunch and dinner, but nothing at breakfast. And the quality across the board was inconsistent. Marilou had a contact there, a building owner she knew through her late husband's family, who had a ground-floor space available. Slightly larger than the original Carinderia. The right location for the student demographic. We projected it out, conservatively. I made her do it twice because the first time I thought she was being optimistic about the margins, and the second time confirmed she wasn't. The number to set it up properly was P5 $80,000, roughly $10,300. That included rent deposit, kitchen equipment, fit-out, initial stock. More than 3 times what we'd put into the first location. A meaningful number even against my savings. Her eldest daughter, Christina, 23, would manage it. Christina had been helping at the original location since I'd arrived, and she was sharp, fast, organized in the same way her mother was organized. I had no concerns about Christina. I had concerns about Ronaldo. Ronaldo is the husband of Marilou's younger sister. He has a van. Those are the 2 facts about Ronaldo that are directly relevant to the business. He appeared in our planning conversations about the second location the way a weather system appears, gradually and then completely. Marilou mentioned him once, casually, as someone who might help with supply runs and deliveries between the 2 locations. I said that sounded useful. She said she'd let him know. What I didn't understand was that this wasn't a job interview. It was an announcement. Ronaldo had a van and a family connection, and when a business opportunity adjacent to the family expands, family members with relevant resources make themselves available. That's how it works. The foreigner saying, "sounds good," was understood as confirmation, not the beginning of a conversation about terms and expectations. For 3 months, Ronaldo showed up when he felt like it. I am trying to be fair about this. He wasn't stealing anything. He wasn't sabotaging anything. He would show up 3 days out of 5, sometimes only 2, occasionally not at all for a stretch. And when he was there, he worked adequately and moved the supplies between locations and had a pleasant enough manner. But in 34 years of professional kitchens, the one rule that was never negotiable was that if you were scheduled, you showed up, every time. Because the whole system depends on every part being there. One missing piece creates problems that cascade. By month 3, I was managing the delivery schedule around Ronaldo's availability rather than the other way around, and that was backwards, and I said so. Not to Ronaldo directly. I didn't know how to do that in a way that wouldn't create a worse problem. I said it to Marilou. What followed was the most uncomfortable week of the entire experience so far. Not because Marilou was defensive exactly, but because I was asking her to do something that had a cost I couldn't fully see. Telling her family that the arrangement with Ronaldo wasn't working wasn't a simple management conversation. It was her telling her sister's husband, in front of the extended family, that he wasn't reliable enough, which reflected on him, which reflected on her sister, which reflected on the whole family structure that she lived inside of every day. I had framed it as a business problem. It was actually a social negotiation that required her to spend political capital she'd need for other things later. She did it anyway. I don't know exactly what she said or how she said it. That conversation happened in Cebuano, and she only gave me the summary. But Ronaldo stopped coming after that. The deliveries we handled differently. Contracted to a small logistics guy, Marilou knew who charged $2,500 a week and showed up every time. The second location opened on a Tuesday morning. Christina was there at 5:30. Arroz caldo ready by 6. By 7, the window stools were full. I stood at the back of the room and watched the service run, and didn't say anything. Didn't need to. But I kept thinking about Marilou's face during the week of the Ronaldo conversation. The particular stillness, of someone managing a cost that isn't visible on any spreadsheet. I'd been so sure I was right about the operational problem. I was right. And I also hadn't understood what fixing it would require of her. Those are both true. I try to hold both of them. About a month after the second location opened, an envelope appeared. Marilu brought it to me on a Thursday after service, set it on the table without comment, and sat down with her water. Inside was a handwritten invoice, in Tagalog, for $35,000, roughly $630, for consulting services related to the build-out of the university branch location. The invoice was from a man named Manny, Marilu's uncle on her mother's side. I had never met Manny. I had never discussed anything with Manny. As far as I was aware, Manny had no involvement in the second location build-out whatsoever. I asked Marilu about this in the same tone I'd used to ask about a food cost discrepancy. Direct, not angry. "What is this?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she explained, carefully, that Manny had given advice during the planning stage, had made some introductions, the kind of thing that in her family's understanding had value and warranted acknowledgement. I sat with that. Manny had made introductions. To whom? I asked. She mentioned a name I didn't recognize, someone connected to the building owner. Whether that introduction had been useful in any concrete way was unclear. Here's what I should have done. Said no, politely and firmly, and explained that I couldn't pay for services that weren't agreed upon in advance and weren't documented. That's the correct response. Clean, defensible, sets a clear standard. Here's what I actually did. I negotiated it down to $18,000 and paid it. I am not proud of that. I told myself I was managing the relationship, keeping the peace, that 18,000 pesos was about $320 and not worth the friction. All of that was probably true. It was also a mistake, because paying a reduced version of an unauthorized invoice doesn't communicate that unauthorized invoices are unacceptable. It communicates that the right opening number is higher than what you want, and the Kano will meet you somewhere in the middle. That precedent cost me twice in the following 4 months. Different requests, different family members, same underlying logic. The business was connected to the family. The business was doing well, and a family member who felt they had contributed something, in ways real or imagined, had a reasonable expectation of acknowledgement. I need to be honest about something here, because I think a lot of foreigners get this wrong in the other direction. These weren't scams. Manny wasn't a con artist. The cousin who asked for a position at the university branch, a woman named Daisy, mid-20s, pleasant enough, wasn't running a game. What was happening was a cultural framework operating as designed, one where a successful enterprise embedded in a family network is understood as a shared resource, and where the foreigner who benefits from that network is expected to contribute back to it. This is not unreasonable. It's just different from how I was wired to think about business. The problem with Daisy was operational, not intentional. She worked the breakfast shift at the university branch for about 6 weeks. She was inconsistent in ways that were different from Ronaldo's inconsistency. She showed up, but she moved slowly. She took long breaks. She had extended phone conversations during service that Christina couldn't address directly because Daisy was family, and the social cost of confronting family was too high. When I finally had the conversation with Marilu about ending the arrangement, it required a small severance payment, $12,000, to handle the exit in a way that didn't fracture the family structure, and 2 weeks of awkward Sunday dinners that I wasn't present for, but that Marilu described to me in the compressed, neutral way she used when something had cost her more than she wanted to say. Daisy was $12,000 and some goodwill. The uncle's invoice, negotiated down, was $18,000. Add another P50,000 across that period in smaller things I said yes to when I should have asked more questions. A repair quote that seemed high, a supplier I used once because someone's cousin was the supplier, and the miscellaneous cost column was real and growing. I started saying no. Politely, specifically, with a clear explanation. Everything going forward needed to be agreed in writing, at a rate established before the work, or I couldn't approve it. Not because I was suspicious of anyone, because that's how I ran every kitchen I'd ever worked in. And this was a kitchen. The second pressure was the visa. I'd been extending my tourist visa through the Bureau of Immigration, 30 days at a time, which is the standard extension, up to a maximum of 36 months from original entry, before you have to leave the country and re-enter. I was approaching month 22 and starting to think seriously about the SRRV, the Special Resident Retiree's Visa, which for someone my age required a $10,000 deposit into a Philippine bank account, but gave me permanent resident status and the right to stay indefinitely. The online forums made it sound like a form and a check. It was not a form and a check. It was a document list that required things I didn't have readily available. Notarized pension certification, FBI background check with apostille, medical certificate from a Philippine physician, and a processing time that the forum said was 4 to 6 weeks, and which was, in reality, closer to 4 months. For 2 of those months, I was in genuine uncertainty about whether my timeline was going to work, whether I might have to exit the country and re-enter while the application was pending, which would have created its own complications. I did not tell Marilou most of this. She had enough to manage. The third pressure was my daughter. Her name is Kendra. She's 34, lives in St. Pete, teaches elementary school. We talk maybe twice a month, which is about the same frequency we had when I was working. She'd known I was in the Philippines since the first extension, and had understood it as an extended trip, and had gradually understood it as something more permanent, and was not entirely comfortable with that. She called me on a video call on a Sunday morning, her Saturday night, and asked me directly if I was being taken advantage of. I said no, and explained the corporate structure, the documented loan, the lawyer, the repayment schedule. She listened. She was still skeptical in the particular way of someone who has read too many news articles about things going wrong for foreigners in Southeast Asia, and is applying that framework to a situation that doesn't quite fit it. Then she asked, "Dad, does she know you're not rich?" I thought about that for a second. Honestly, thought about it. Marilou knew my pension figure. I'd disclosed it during the legal setup because it was relevant to establishing the loan repayment terms. Whether she fully understood what a union pension meant in American terms, whether she'd translated it into an accurate picture of my net worth versus my monthly income, I genuinely didn't know. What I did know was that she'd seen the business's financials in detail, knew exactly what the partnership was generating, and had never once asked me for anything outside the documented structure. I told Kendra that. She said she'd feel better when the loan started being repaid. I understood that, and I told her so. And I meant it. 2 years in. Let me tell you what the numbers look like. Total capital deployed: $180,000 on the initial equipment, P45,000 for the legal setup, P320,000 for the first expansion into the back room and the second dining area, P580,000 for the university branch build-out, and roughly $80,000 in miscellaneous costs that includes Manny's negotiated invoice, Daisy's exit settlement, 2 tourist visa extension fees, and a handful of smaller decisions I made wrong before I started making them right. Total, approximately $1,205,000, about $21,500 USD. Against a savings position of $95,000 and a pension that deposits every month regardless of what I do, that's manageable. It's not trivial. $21,000 is real money, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel each stage of it. But it's manageable. My savings are down to around $73,000. The pension and Social Security together still come to just under $4,000 a month, most of which I don't spend because my cost of living here is low. I pay $22,000 a month for a decent apartment, about 10 minutes from the original Carinderia. I eat well. I don't need much else. The loan repayment started in month 14, per the terms we documented with the lawyer. $15,000 a month, which is about $270, coming out of the business's net before distribution. Marilou pushed for this more than I did. I'd told her we could wait until month 18 if the cash flow needed it. She said the terms were the terms and she wanted to honor them. That's been consistent. 18 payments so far, every one on time, which means I've recovered $270,000, roughly $4,800 of the original investment. The math on full recovery takes time, but it's tracking. Combined net revenue across both locations is running about $180,000 a month right now. That's after food costs, staff wages, rent at the university branch, utilities, split proportionally per the corporate structure. My 40% comes to $72,000, which is around $1,280 a month on top of everything else. I didn't come here for the money, but it doesn't hurt. The SRRV came through 4 months ago, $10,000 deposited into a Philippine bank account as required. That's a separate line item from the business investment. And now I have a card that says I can stay here indefinitely. The process was exactly as slow and document-heavy as it turned out to be, and I'd do it again. Ronaldo and I are not warm. We see each other at family occasions, and we are polite, and we do not discuss business. That's probably the right outcome. Daisy I haven't seen since the exit, which I understand is also the right outcome. The SRRV application was the last major administrative thing. Now I wake up, and I have somewhere to be. That's still the most important sentence I can say about any of this. Here's what I want to tell you. If you're watching this because you're thinking about doing something similar, not a romance, not a retirement fantasy, an actual business in a country you don't fully understand yet, with a person whose cultural framework is different from yours. First, document everything before money moves. Not because you don't trust the person, because trust is not a legal structure, and a legal structure is what protects you both when things get complicated. And things will get complicated. They always do. Second, find the coal at the bar. There is always someone who has already burned themselves. Find that person and listen to them before you do anything. The P850,000 call lost was the most valuable tuition I ever received, and I didn't pay a peso of it. Third, learn the cultural logic before you push against it. I was right about Ronaldo being unreliable. I was also operating in a social environment where my being right had costs I couldn't see, and Marilou had to absorb. Both things can be true simultaneously. The job is to understand the full picture before you act, not just the part that fits your existing framework. Fourth, go slow enough to know what you're getting into. Not so slow that you're just studying it forever and never doing anything. There's a version of caution that becomes its own kind of avoidance. At some point, you have to put money on the table and see what happens. Just make sure the table is solid first. And fifth, and this is the one I didn't expect to be saying, the food culture here is real. It's not a backdrop. It's not atmosphere. It's the thing itself. There are people here who care about food the way I spent my whole career caring about food, and they're running small operations with old equipment and genuine skill. And there is room to work alongside that if you come with something to offer rather than just money to spend. I didn't come here to retire. Turns out I just needed a different kitchen. I walk into the original carinderia most mornings around 6. Marilu is usually already there. The breakfast service has a rhythm now, a pace we've built over 2 years of adjusting and arguing and occasionally getting it wrong and fixing it. The smell of the arroz caldo hits you at the door. The prep window I cut in the wall catches the early light. The plastic stools are already filling up. It is, without question, the closest thing to home I have felt in 2 years. Maybe longer. I'll leave it at that. And that's Harley's story. Not the story we usually tell on this channel. No catastrophic loss, no disappearing woman, no account emptied, and a flight home in shame. What Harley brought to the Philippines was 34 years of professional competence, a savings account he'd built carefully, and the good fortune of walking into a bar on the right night and meeting a man named Cole who asked him one question at exactly the right moment. What made the difference wasn't luck, though luck was part of it. It was preparation. The legal structure before the money moved. The willingness to slow down when slowing down felt unbearable. The work of learning, still ongoing by his own account, to understand a cultural framework that doesn't run on the same rules he spent his career living by. This is the rarer kind of story. But it's not a fairy tale. He spent over $21,000 in a foreign country, navigated family dynamics that nearly derailed the partnership twice, spent 2 months uncertain about whether he could legally stay, and had to have an uncomfortable conversation with his daughter about whether he knew what he was doing. He did know what he was doing. Mostly. And the parts where he didn't, he learned. If you're considering a business venture in the Philippines, the lessons in Harley's story are sitting right here, free of charge. The legal structure, the cultural navigation, the importance of finding the coal. That's what Inside the Philippines is here for. We'll see you in the next one.